My name is Sarah, I'm 35, and my husband confessed he was sleeping with my own sister, right as I was about to tell him I was pregnant with our miracle baby. Before I tell you how I took everything from him in the divorce and how his own family helped me do it, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The clinking of silverware on porcelain was the loudest sound in the world, right after my husband, Mark, said the words, "I've been sleeping with your sister." He didn't whisper it. He didn't choke on the words. He just said it. A simple fact, delivered across the white tablecloth of our favorite restaurant, the Oak Room, the same place he'd asked me to marry him 6 years ago. My hand was frozen halfway to my water glass. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. The waiter's voice from a nearby table, asking about dessert options, sounded like it was coming from underwater. My sister. Chloe. My mind just snapped. It fled the scene. It ran back 2 months, to a Tuesday morning in our quiet Chicago home. I was standing in the master bathroom, leaning against the cool marble of the countertop, staring at a little white plastic stick I'd placed there exactly 3 minutes before. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope and fear. For 5 years, Mark and I had been on the brutal, heartbreaking roller coaster of infertility. 5 years of appointments, of dashed hopes, of quiet tears shed in this very bathroom. We'd finally given up, made a fragile peace with the idea that it would just be the two of us. And then, I was late. I'd told myself it was stress. Our jobs as doctors were demanding. But a tiny, stubborn seed of hope had sprouted. I bought the test on my way home from the hospital, my hands clammy as I paid the cashier. Now, I took a deep, shaky breath and turned it over. 2 pink lines. I gasped. Not a scream, just a sharp, sudden intake of air. I sank to the floor, my legs giving out from under me. Tears, hot and immediate, streamed down my face. They weren't tears of sadness this time. They were tears of pure, unadulterated shock and joy. I was pregnant. After all this time, after all the pain, a miracle was growing inside of me. I laughed through the tears, a messy, hysterical sound, my hand pressed flat against my stomach. My first thought, my only thought, was Mark. He was at a medical conference in Denver for the week. I wanted to call him, to scream the news through the phone, but I stopped myself. This wasn't news to be shared over a crackly connection. This was news that deserved a moment. A perfect moment. So I planned. I booked a table at the Oak Room for the day he got back. I went to my first ultrasound alone, my heart swelling as I saw the tiny, flickering heartbeat on the screen. The doctor printed a picture for me, a little black and white image that looked like a grainy photo of the moon, but to me, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I bought a small, silver picture frame and put the sonogram inside. I even wrapped it, a little box tied with a blue ribbon. We'd always joked that the moment we found out, we'd have to start a college fund immediately. This was the start of everything. For 2 months, I held this perfect, beautiful secret, letting it warm me from the inside out. I imagined the look on Mark's face. The surprise, the disbelief, the tears of joy that would mirror my own. It was this image that got me through the long shifts at work. It was this image I held in my mind as I drove to O'Hare to pick him up that afternoon. He'd been quiet in the car, distant. I'd chalked it up to exhaustion from his trip. I'd chattered excitedly about our reservation, about how good it was to have him home. He just nodded, his eyes fixed on the traffic outside. Even now, sitting here, the little gift-wrapped box was in my purse, resting on the chair beside me. My hand had kept drifting to it all night, feeling the sharp corners of the frame through the leather. My mind crashed back into the present with the force of a physical blow. The warm glow of my secret was extinguished, replaced by a black, icy void. He was still looking at me, his expression unreadable. He was waiting for me to react. To scream. To cry. To do something. The sounds of the restaurant rushed back in. The laughter, the music, the low hum of conversation. Everything was normal, but my world had tilted off its axis. My breath hitched in my throat. My gaze, slow and deliberate, moved from his cold, empty eyes to my purse sitting on the adjacent chair. Inside was the sonogram. Inside was the proof of our miracle. My hand, trembling slightly, lifted from the table. It moved through the air, slow, as if wading through thick water, reaching for the purse's leather strap. My hand closed around the cool leather of my purse strap. For a split second, I had a wild, insane urge to pull out the little silver frame and slide it across the table. To make him look at it. To make him see the tiny, flickering life he had just condemned. But I didn't. That sonogram, that proof of a miracle, was mine. He didn't deserve to see it. He didn't deserve to be a part of it. Without a word, I stood up. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh, ugly sound in the otherwise elegant restaurant. Mark's face, a mask of confusion, looked up at me. "Sarah? What are you doing? Sit down. People are looking." I didn't even look at him. I looked through him. I took my purse, turned, and walked away. I could feel the eyes of the other diners on my back, but I didn't care. I walked straight out the heavy oak doors, into the cool Chicago night, and I didn't look back. The drive home was a blur. The city lights smeared across my windshield, warped by the hot, silent tears streaming down my face. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I was on autopilot, my body navigating the familiar streets while my mind was a screaming, chaotic void. My phone, lying on the passenger seat, began to buzz. Mark's name lit up the screen. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. A text came through. Then another. I glanced over, my vision blurry. "Where are you going?" "Sarah, you're making a scene. Get back here. This is not how you handle things. Call me now." Each message was a fresh stab of disbelief. Not an apology. Not a hint of remorse. Just anger. Annoyance. As if I was the one who had done something wrong. As if my pain was an inconvenience to him. I felt a laugh, a bitter, broken sound, bubble up in my chest. I pulled the car over to the curb, my body shaking with a toxic mix of grief and rage. I turned the phone to silent and tossed it back on the seat. When I finally got home, the house was dark and silent. It felt alien, like a stranger's house. I locked the door behind me and went straight upstairs to our bedroom. My bedroom. I locked that door, too. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just collapsed onto the bed, curling into a tight ball, the sobs I'd been holding back finally ripping through me. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen shut. I cried until there were no tears left, just a hollow, aching exhaustion that finally dragged me into a fitful sleep. I woke up hours later. The clock on the nightstand glowed, 3:17 a.m. The house was unnervingly quiet. A deep, parched thirst pulled me from the bed. As I crept down the stairs, my bare feet silent on the wood, I saw dim light from the living room. And there he was. Mark was asleep on the couch, his head propped on a pillow, a blanket pulled up to his chest. He looked so peaceful. So untroubled. The sight of him lying there, sleeping the sound sleep of the innocent after what he had done, made my blood run cold. All the grief, all the sorrow, instantly evaporated, replaced by a pure, unadulterated fury. How dare he sleep? How dare he find peace when he had just detonated our entire life? My eyes drifted from his face to the coffee table beside him. His phone was lying there, face up. I had never, not once in our entire marriage, looked through his phone. I trusted him. The very idea had felt like a violation. But trust was a luxury I no longer had. Trust had been a fool's game, and I had been the biggest fool of all. A cold, methodical calm settled over me. This wasn't about snooping anymore. This was about survival. I needed to know the truth. All of it. I needed to know the depth of the rot that had been festering right under my nose. I walked toward the couch, each step deliberate. He didn't stir. I reached down, my hand steady now, and picked up the phone. It felt heavy, like a weapon. I swiped the screen on. It asked for a passcode. I entered the 4 digits he'd always used, our anniversary. My fingers trembled slightly as I pressed the last number. He hadn't even bothered to change it. That's how sure he was of me. That's how certain he was that I'd never doubt him. The screen unlocked. His home screen, a picture of the two of us smiling on a vacation in Italy, stared back at me. A fresh wave of nausea washed over me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and my thumb hovered over the green message icon. I tapped the message icon. My heart was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. The list of recent conversations loaded, and there it was, right at the top. A name I knew as well as my own. Chloe. My little sister. There were dozens of messages, a long and unbroken chain stretching back for months. My thumb trembled as I opened the thread. And the world fell away. It wasn't just messages. It was pictures. Pictures of my husband, pictures of my sister. Pictures of them together in hotel rooms I didn't recognize, smiling, laughing, their bodies intertwined in ways that made my stomach heave. There was a selfie of Chloe, wearing one of Mark's hospital scrub tops, a smug little smirk on her face. There was a picture Mark had taken of her, asleep in what looked sickeningly like our guest bedroom. It was more brutal than anything I could have imagined. This wasn't a secret, shameful affair. This was a whole other life they had built together, a life lived in the shadows of my own. I scrolled, my mind numbly absorbing the horror. The messages were a torrent of casual cruelty. They planned their meetups while he was supposedly at late-night hospital shifts. They talked about me. Chloe asked what I was wearing one night when they were texting. Mark had replied, probably those ugly gray sweatpants she loves. I remembered that night. I'd been curled up on the couch, exhausted after a 14-hour shift, waiting for him to come home. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck. The humiliation was a physical thing, a sickness in my gut. They had laughed at me. They had mocked my trust, my love, my life. I kept scrolling, propelled by a morbid need to see it all, to understand the full scope of their treachery. I saw messages where they'd arranged to meet while he was at that conference in Denver, the same trip he'd just returned from. The affair hadn't stopped. It was still happening. Then I saw it. The message that shattered whatever was left of my heart into dust. It was from Chloe, sent about a month ago, late at night. Sometimes I think the best part is that she has no idea. Lying next to you in a hotel room, knowing she's at home waiting for you. It's a rush. I love the way you look at me at family dinner, right in front of her. For once, I feel like I'm winning. I have something that was always supposed to be yours. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. I didn't even flinch. I just stared at the wall, the words burning behind my eyes. For once, I feel like I'm winning. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a competition to her. A conquest. My marriage, my husband, my life, it was a prize she had set out to steal. And Mark had let her. He had handed it over. A sound, a strangled, guttural sob, escaped my lips. I clamped a hand over my mouth, my body shaking uncontrollably. This pain was a different kind. It wasn't the shock of infidelity anymore. It was the sickening realization that the two people I should have been able to trust most in the world had conspired against me, had reveled in my ignorance, had found pleasure in my deception. My own sister. A cold, hard clarity cut through the pain. This was not something to be fixed. This was not a wound that could be stitched up. This was a rot that went to the bone. My eyes flickered to Mark, still sleeping soundly on the couch. The image of his peaceful face was no longer just ironic, it was grotesque. With a resolve I didn't know I possessed, I stood up. I picked his phone up off the floor. Then I walked to the kitchen, got my own phone, and began to take pictures. Click. A screenshot of their explicit photos. Click. A shot of their hotel plans. Click. 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 I photographed every damning message, every cruel joke, every piece of their secret life. Each flash of my phone's camera was a small act of reclamation. I was no longer the fool in the dark. I was the keeper of the truth. And in that moment, sitting on the cold floor in the dark, I knew my marriage wasn't just broken. It had never been real. If you're still listening, please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below. It lets me know you've given me a like, and it tells me you're here with me on this journey. Your support is a bigger encouragement than you can imagine. Please, comment with the number 1, and then let me tell you what happened next. I didn't go back to the bedroom. I couldn't. It didn't feel like mine anymore. Instead, I grabbed the overnight bag I kept in the hall closet for weekend trips. My movements were quiet, mechanical. There were no more tears. The grief had burned itself out, leaving behind something cold and hard and sharp. I packed the essentials, a change of clothes, my toothbrush, my laptop, the charger for my phone. I didn't take anything sentimental, no photos, no mementos of the life I thought I had. That life was a lie, and I wanted no part of it. With the evidence of my husband's betrayal safely stored on my phone and the bag in my hand, I walked to the front door. I took one last look back at the living room. Mark hadn't moved. He was still lost in his peaceful, untroubled sleep. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel anything at all. I just slipped out the door, closing it softly behind me, and walked away from my home, my husband, and the last 6 years of my life. I drove through the pre-dawn emptiness of Chicago, the city streets deserted. My destination was the one place I knew I would be safe, my parents' house in the suburbs. When I arrived, the sky was just beginning to lighten from black to a bruised purple. I used my old key to let myself in. My mom, an early riser, was already in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. She looked up, her face a mixture of surprise and immediate concern. She saw the bag in my hand, the puffiness around my eyes, the deadened look on my face. She didn't ask a single question. She just stood up, wrapped her arms around me, and held me. In that moment, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The next day, my parents shielded me. They answered my phone when it rang, telling Mark in firm, clipped tones that I was safe but did not wish to speak with him. They let me sleep, bringing me food and tea, giving me the space to just exist in the wreckage. But I knew I couldn't just hide. That night, after a long talk with my mom, I called my closest friend, a lawyer in the city. She didn't specialize in family law, but she knew who did. "You need Janet Miller," she said, her voice firm. "She's not cheap, but she's a shark. She's exactly who you need right now." I got an appointment with Janet the very next day. Her office was in a sleek high-rise downtown, all glass and steel. Janet herself was in her 50s, with sharp eyes, an impeccable suit, and an aura of no-nonsense competence that was incredibly reassuring. I sat across the wide mahogany desk from her and told her everything, my voice low but steady. I showed her the photos on my phone. She looked at them with a grim, impassive expression, her face giving nothing away. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair. "Good," she said, her first word cutting through the quiet of the room. "You did well to document this. It makes things clearer." For the first time in 48 hours, I felt a flicker of something other than pain. It was a tiny spark of hope. I had an ally. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I was taking back control. That feeling lasted for exactly 6 hours. The next afternoon, I went to the local grocery store to pick up a few things for my mom. It was a mundane errand, an attempt to feel normal. I filled my cart, went to the checkout, and when the total came up, I pulled out the debit card for our joint account. The cashier ran it. A moment later, she looked up at me with an apologetic frown. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's declined." A hot flush of embarrassment crept up my neck. "Oh, that's strange. Could you try it again?" She did. Same result. My heart started to beat a little faster. I paid with the emergency cash I had in my wallet and walked out to my car, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I immediately called the bank. After 5 minutes on hold, a polite but impersonal voice on the other end of the line delivered the news. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Collins, but the account was frozen this morning by the primary account holder, Mr. Mark Collins." Frozen. The word echoed in my head. I got back to my parents' house, my mind reeling. On the hall table was a crisp white envelope, delivered by courier. My name was typed on the front. My hands were shaking as I ripped it open. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. Mark's new lawyer. The letter was brief, clinical, and brutal. It stated that due to my recent erratic behavior and clear emotional instability, Mark had taken steps to secure their marital assets. It implied I was incapable of managing our finances and was a potential risk to our shared estate. I stood there in the hallway, the letter trembling in my hand. This wasn't just a breakup. This wasn't just a divorce. This was war. He hadn't just betrayed me, he was trying to destroy me. He had left me pregnant, homeless, and now, he was trying to leave me penniless. The tiny spark of hope I had felt in Janet's office was snuffed out, replaced by a cold, terrifying panic. The panic was a physical thing, a cold claw gripping my insides. I immediately called Janet, my voice high and shaky as I read the letter to her over the phone. I expected her to be angry, to be as shocked as I was. Instead, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Good," she said finally, her voice as calm and sharp as ever. "Good?" I nearly shrieked. "Janet, he's cut me off. He's calling me unstable. How is any of this good?" "Because he's overplayed his hand," she said, her tone cutting through my hysteria. "He's arrogant. He thinks he can bully you into a quick, cheap settlement. He just showed us his entire strategy, Sarah. Now, we show him ours. We won't fight him with emotion. We will fight him with consequences." Her confidence was a lifeline. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. "Okay," I said, my voice still trembling slightly. "Okay. What do we do?" "First," she said, "you need to officially inform him of your pregnancy. It needs to be on the record. A simple, direct phone call. No emotion, no arguing. Just the facts. Can you do that?" My stomach twisted at the thought of speaking to him, but I knew she was right. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." That afternoon, I sat in my childhood bedroom and dialed his number. He picked up on the first ring. "Sarah?" Finally. "What the hell is going on?" I ignored his question. My voice, when I spoke, was as cold and steady as I could make it. "Mark, I am calling to inform you of something you have a right to know. I am pregnant." Silence. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of his breathing on the other end of the line. I thought, for a foolish second, that maybe a shred of the man I married was still in there. That maybe this news would break through his arrogance. I was wrong. His voice, when he finally spoke, was laced with a venom that chilled me to the bone. "Are you serious? You're trying to baby trap me now? After all this?" He let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "You know what? I hope you have a miscarriage." The line went dead. I didn't slam the phone down. I just gently placed it back in its cradle. I didn't cry. I felt nothing but a profound, empty coldness. The man I had loved was gone. In his place was a monster. I called Janet back and told her what he'd said. There was another long pause. "Okay," she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "That's it. Time for step 2. Do you have a good relationship with his mother?" "Carol?" "Yes," I said, confused. "She's always been wonderful to me." "Good," Janet said. "Call her. Invite her to lunch tomorrow. Don't tell her why. Just say you need to talk. And Sarah? Bring a copy of that letter from his lawyer." The next day, I met my mother-in-law, Carol, at a small cafe. She looked worried, her kind face etched with concern. We ordered, and then I took a deep breath. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just calmly, factually, laid out the truth. The affair with my sister. The confession at our anniversary spot. The cruel text messages. And then, the pregnancy. Her eyes widened, a flicker of joy immediately followed by horror as she understood the timing. "Carol," I said, my voice steady, "I wanted you to be a grandmother more than anything." But Mark's reaction, he wished that I would lose the baby. Her hand flew to her mouth, a stifled gasp escaping her lips. Finally, I pushed the copy of the lawyer's letter across the table. "And this is what he did yesterday. He's frozen our accounts and is trying to paint me as mentally unstable." She read the letter, her face growing paler with every word. When she looked up, her eyes were blazing with a fury I had never seen before. "That monster," she whispered. "That absolute monster." She immediately pulled out her phone and called her husband, my father-in-law, Tom. Her voice was low and urgent. "Tom, you need to hear this." I sat in silence as she recounted the story to him. 20 minutes later, I was back at my parents' house, my heart pounding with a nervous, uncertain energy. An hour after that, my phone rang. It was Carol. "We've handled it," she said, her voice grim. "We spoke to Mark. I'm so sorry, Sarah. So deeply sorry for what he has put you through." I didn't know what handled it meant until later that evening. I was in the guest room when I heard my father-in-law's voice booming from Carol's phone, which she'd left on speaker in the kitchen. Tom was not a man who yelled, but he was yelling now. "Your inheritance? You can forget it." "What inheritance? You think we'd reward this behavior? Not a dime, you hear me? Not a single dime. It's all going into a trust fund for that baby you were so quick to discard. You threw away this family, Mark. You are on your own." The call ended with the sound of Tom slamming the phone down. A profound silence fell over the house. And in that silence, I knew. Janet was right. We hadn't fought him with emotion. We had fought him with consequences. And we had just won the first major battle. A few days of quiet followed. A fragile, temporary peace. I spent the time resting, talking with Janet, and trying to wrap my head around the fact that I was going to be a single mother. The fury from my in-laws had been a powerful shield, and for the first time, I felt like I had a real chance to get through this. Then, one evening, a car screeched into my parents' driveway. I looked out the living room window, and my stomach plummeted. It was Mark's silver BMW. My dad, seeing the look on my face, immediately stood up. "He's not welcome here." "I know," I said, my voice quiet. "But I need to do this. I need to face him." My dad hesitated, then nodded grimly. "I'll be right in the next room." Mark was already at the door, knocking insistently. I took a deep breath and opened it. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed, his clothes were rumpled, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. The arrogant, confident man from the restaurant was gone. In his place was a desperate stranger. "Sarah," he started, his voice cracking. "Thank God. I needed to see you. We need to talk." I didn't invite him in. I just stood there, blocking the doorway. "There's nothing to talk about, Mark." "Yes, there is," he insisted, his voice rising with a pathetic urgency. "We can fix this. I know I messed up. I messed up terribly. But we can't throw everything away. Think about the baby. We need to make this work, for the baby." The hypocrisy was so astounding it almost made me laugh. "The baby?" I asked, my voice dripping with ice. "The baby you wished I would miscarry? That baby?" His face fell. He had the decency to look ashamed, for a moment. "I didn't mean that," he mumbled. "I was angry. I was scared. Sarah, please." "Chloe," she left me. "My parents won't even take my calls. I have nothing left." "And whose fault is that?" I asked, my voice flat. That's when he switched tactics. The pleading vanished, replaced by the familiar, ugly sneer of resentment. "You know, this isn't all on me," he said, his voice turning hard. "You played a part in this. You were never here, Sarah. Always at the hospital, always working toward that next promotion. You cared more about your career than you ever did about me." I just stared at him, incredulous. "We're both doctors, Mark. We built our lives around our careers. You never had a problem with it before." "I expected you to slow down," he shot back, his voice getting louder. "After we got married, I thought you'd want to focus on us, on a family. But you never did. You were cold. Distant. You pushed me away." He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "And I'm not the only one who sees it. Even our friends know what you were like. Chloe's had to explain to everyone how you pushed me into her arms for years. She's been defending me." The words hit me like a physical blow. They had been slandering me. Working together to paint me as the villain in a story where I was the only victim. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. But I wouldn't let him see me crumble. I straightened my spine, a cold, hard rage solidifying inside me. "My friends?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "My work? None of that made you sleep with my sister, Mark. And none of that is why your parents are cutting you off." I watched his face, saw the flicker of confusion in his eyes. He still didn't fully believe it. It was time for the final blow. "I heard the phone call, Mark," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "I heard your father. There is no inheritance. There is no family money coming your way. It's gone. They're putting all of it into a trust for my baby. The baby you don't want. You don't just have nothing left, Mark. You are nothing." The color drained from his face. For a second, he just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, the reality of his situation finally crashing down on him. The arrogance, the blame, the self-pity, it all dissolved into pure, ugly rage. "You did this," he hissed, his voice a low snarl. He took another step forward, closing the distance between us until he was just inches from my face. "You vile, manipulative bitch. You turned them against me. You ruined my life." He was yelling now, spit flying from his mouth. I instinctively flinched back, my hand coming up to shield my stomach. A primal fear, cold and sharp, shot through me. He was completely out of control. And then, in a blur of motion, the front door was flung open. My dad had been listening, just as he'd promised. He saw Mark towering over me, saw my posture of fear. And something inside him snapped. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He moved. 1 second he was in the doorway, the next he had crossed the porch and his fist connected with Mark's jaw. The sound was a sickening, solid thud. Mark stumbled backward, a look of utter shock on his face, his hand flying to his mouth. My dad, his face a mask of cold fury, wasn't done. He grabbed the front of Mark's expensive shirt, bunching the fabric in his fist, and dragged him off the porch and onto the front lawn. "Get out," my dad snarled, his voice low and shaking with rage. He shoved Mark hard, sending him stumbling onto the grass. "You are done here. If you ever come near my daughter or this house again, I swear to God it will be the last thing you do." Mark just stared, dazed and bleeding, from the lawn. He looked from my dad's furious face to mine. Then, without another word, he scrambled to his feet, stumbled to his car, and sped away. The front door closed with a quiet, final click. My dad's strong arm came around my shoulders, pulling me into a hug. I leaned against him, shaking, the adrenaline finally leaving my body. It was over. The confrontation I had been dreading was over. And I hadn't been alone. The weeks that followed the final, ugly confrontation were quiet, but it was the quiet of a battlefield after the fighting has stopped. The war had moved from my front porch to the sterile conference rooms and email chains of the divorce proceedings. It was a different kind of fight, one waged with documents and deadlines, but it was no less draining. Janet was my general. She was brilliant, unflappable, and utterly ruthless in her defense of me and my unborn child. The process was grueling. There were depositions, where Mark's lawyer tried to twist my words and paint me as vindictive and unstable, just as his initial letter had threatened. Mark, sitting across the table, couldn't even look me in the eye. He stuck to his story, that I was a cold, career-obsessed wife and that his affair with Chloe was a desperate cry for affection. But Janet was prepared. For every accusation, she had a counterpoint. For every lie, she had a piece of evidence. The pictures from his phone were a silent, damning rebuttal to his claims of a meaningless fling. His text messages, wishing our child harm, destroyed any pretense of him being a concerned father. We were fighting for full custody, and with every word he spoke, he made Janet's job easier. The real battle, however, was over finances. Mark's initial arrogance had been shattered, but he was still trying to hide as much as he could. He claimed his salary was his only real asset, that his investments were minimal, that there was very little to split. He was trying to bleed me out, to force me into accepting a lowball offer out of sheer exhaustion. "He's lying," Janet said to me after one particularly frustrating meeting. "A surgeon with his experience, from his family? There's more. We just have to find it." And that's when she brought in the heavy artillery, a forensic accountant. A quiet, unassuming man named Arthur who had a genius for finding money that people didn't want to be found. For weeks, Arthur dug. He went through years of bank statements, tax returns, and credit card bills. It was a slow, painstaking process. I tried to focus on my health, on preparing for the baby, but the weight of the legal battle was a constant presence. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, Janet called me. "We found it," she said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. The gotcha moment wasn't a dramatic courtroom scene. It was something far quieter and more devastating. We were all gathered in a large conference room, me, Janet, Mark, and his lawyer. His lawyer was droning on about a settlement offer that was frankly insulting. Janet let him finish. Then, she slid a thick, spiral-bound binder across the polished table. It landed in front of Mark's lawyer with a soft, heavy thud. "Before we discuss your client's generous offer," Janet said, her voice smooth as glass, "I'd like to direct your attention to page 47. It details the offshore account in the Cayman Islands that your client funded 2 years ago and has been systematically transferring assets into ever since. Arthur was kind enough to document every single transaction." I watched as Mark's lawyer opened the binder. I saw his eyes scan the page. I saw the color drain from his face. He slowly closed the binder and looked at Mark, a look of pure, unadulterated fury in his eyes. Mark, for his part, looked like he had been punched in the gut. He was staring at the binder as if it were a snake. The rest of the meeting was short. Mark's side folded completely. There was no more negotiation. Janet dictated the terms, and they agreed to everything. A substantial portion of the hidden assets. A generous alimony agreement. And Mark voluntarily relinquished all parental rights, agreeing to a custody arrangement where he would have no contact, in exchange for a structured child support payment drawn directly from his salary. He didn't want to be a father, and now, he wouldn't have to be. He just had to pay for his sins. A week later, I sat in Janet's office and signed the final divorce papers. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but not with sadness or regret. It was the weight of finality. With each letter of my name, I was closing a thick, heavy book filled with pain and betrayal. As I signed the last page, I felt a lightness spread through my chest. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of my independence. 8 months later, the world was a different place. The sterile quiet of lawyers' offices and conference rooms had been replaced by the soft, peaceful quiet of a nursery at 2 a.m. I was sitting in a comfortable rocking chair, the moonlight spilling through the window, and in my arms, sleeping soundly against my chest, was my daughter. Lily. She was perfect. She had a full head of dark hair, tiny, delicate fingers that would curl around mine, and the softest, most peaceful little breaths. Rocking her in the stillness of the night, I often thought about the storm I had walked through to get to this shore. The pain, the rage, the fear, it all felt like a story that had happened to someone else, in another lifetime. My life had found a new, gentle rhythm, dictated by feedings and diaper changes and the overwhelming, all-consuming love I felt for this tiny human. My former in-laws, Carol and Tom, were a constant, loving presence. They had kept their word. A substantial trust had been established for Lily's future, ensuring she would want for nothing. They visited every week, their faces lighting up with pure joy the moment they saw her. They doted on her, showered her with love, and in a strange and beautiful way, I had gained a family with them even as I had lost their son. They never spoke of Mark. It was as if a painful chapter in all our lives had been surgically removed. I heard, through a mutual acquaintance, that Mark and Chloe hadn't lasted. The pressure of being disowned, coupled with the financial fallout of the divorce, had apparently been too much for their love to handle. He had lost his inheritance, his family, and his mistress. She had gained a pariah status in our family and social circle. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No satisfaction, no anger, not even a flicker of interest. Their story was over. It had nothing to do with me anymore. My story was here, in this quiet room. It was in the steady, rhythmic creak of the rocking chair and the warm, solid weight of my daughter in my arms. I looked down at her sleeping face, her little mouth making tiny sucking motions in her dreams. I had fought a war for her, for us, for this peace. And I had won. My world was no longer defined by a man's betrayal or a sister's jealousy. It was defined by this small, warm, breathing miracle. This was my victory. This was my new beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story all the way to the end. It means the world to me. What's one piece of advice you would give to someone just starting to heal from a deep betrayal? Let me know in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. You are not alone.